You are listening to Proof Text, a Glossa House podcast exploring Scripture with Dr. T. Michael W. Halcomb and Dr. Frederick J. Long. Welcome and enjoy.
Haidete o Philoi. I'm Fletcher from amindforlanguage.com, and you're listening to Greeking Out, a podcast for ancient and Koine Greek learners full of tools, tips, and possibly tirades on learning Greek using comprehension-based methods. If that isn't familiar to you, check out episode 0, The Manifesto, for more info. In this episode, I talked with Michael Halcomb, a Greek professor, pastor, podcaster, and one of the founders of Glossa House. This was a great conversation, especially if you're learning Greek in a class or program that doesn't use communicative-based methods. Michael shares how he incorporated more natural and communicative methods into the courses he took when he was first learning Greek. Michael has also been a voice for communicative-based teaching and resources for a while, so listen in, there's good stuff here. All right, let's jump in. Hi, Michael.
Aloha.
Thank you for agreeing to do the interview. I really appreciate it. And I know we're all looking forward to hearing more of your story of how you got into doing Greek.
Sure. Yeah, it's good to be here. Thanks for the invitation to chat. I appreciate it. I know we hadn't really ever dialogued before today, but that's all right. I'm glad to be meeting you and getting to know you.
Yeah, and again, I've enjoyed doing these interviews because I've gotten to meet some cool people, and I think it's, like I've said in other episodes, I think it's really valuable for beginners to see, okay, how did people who are really good at Greek or can speak well and produce good resources and teach, how did they get from zero to where they are?
Right.
And then I think especially for people who are kind of stuck in that intermediate plateau, or maybe they've done, for example, they've done like biblical Greek, or they've done like anabasis in a classical program. How do they get from that to reading more broadly in the literature? So I think, anyway.
I saw you had interviewed, one of the folks you had interviewed was Seamus McDonald, a good guy. I haven't talked with him in a while, but he used to do some courses with me at Conversational Koine Institute. Super, super bright guy, super sharp, and it's been cool to see some of the neat things that he's been up to in recent years. So, good on you for doing the podcast and taking an interest in this sort of thing. I think it's important as well.
So let me ask. So, how did you get interested in learning Greek?
I'll say that when I first got introduced to Greek, I wasn't interested. Like didn't have much interest. It was kind of a thing where my hand was forced, right? Because I was doing a master's degree where it was required, and so that was really my introduction to it. And the way that started, that's when way back in the day when online teaching, the asynchronous stuff had just become a thing, and Asbury Seminary was branching out into that, and it was very clunky to do online, but it was like the next step from the old correspondence courses where they would like mail you audio cassettes, and you would listen to those on your own and read a book and mail your research papers back in. So this was really the first instantiation of online teaching, and again, it was super clunky. And so there I was, I had my grammar book, and every now and then I could type like a chat message to my professor, but it was basically me learning Greek from a grammar book on my own. And the grammar book was actually really good. It was David Allen Black's Greek grammar, and I love Dave. He's a good Hawaii connection. He's from Hawaii, and same island, Oahu, where I live. And
really,
he's a Hawaii guy. Grew up surfing, and so sometimes when he comes back, we'll meet up for lunch or whatever. But so that's where I started. That was my first introduction to Greek. I had never done a second of Greek, and I got the grammar book dropped on me, and it was that asynchronous online thing. And um, as wonderful as Dave's book is, I still think it's one of the top grammars out there. Boy, was it hard to really get into Greek. I mean, I was riding in the front of the struggle bus, right? I was really, really having trouble getting into Greek. And in growing up in the United States, I mean, we had English classes and stuff, but I can't even remember like a proper like grammar course
Yeah.
growing up, or like a syntax course, or like a linguistics course. I took French and Spanish in high school, but I loved French mainly because the teacher. Spanish I didn't do so well, but I still to this day can't recall doing like a proper English class, right?
Well,
So yeah,
yeah, I drive my wife crazy all the time because she's teaching we homeschool our girls and she's teaching them sentence diagramming, and
yeah,
it's it's the stuff I had in school which I hated and made no sense to me. And then I get to college and we start take a linguistic syntax class, and we have directed graphs with lines and labels, and you don't have to figure out, is it supposed to be an angle line with two little feet, or whatever
right, right.
arcane symbol American high schools use for sentence diagramming. So I'm like,
Yeah,
this is stupid. Just do it the other way. And anyway,
yeah. I had never even heard of sentence diagramming until I got to seminary. Never seen it or heard of it. Um, so I kind of am jealous of people who get that sort of training in high school and already like, I've been my kids, like I have three kids, like they're in sixth and seventh grade. I already know what participles are, and uh, like I'd never heard of that term until I got to seminary. So my language training was non-existent.
hmm.
And so after that first semester, second semester struggle with Greek, I just thought I I just am no good at language, right? I just suck at languages. And this maybe just isn't for me. And then, as part of that same degree program, I did have an on campus class doing Hebrew 1 and 2. Whew, that didn't seem to make that big of a difference from doing it on my own. So um, it was really slogging through Greek and Hebrew there during that master's degree. It was super challenging. Yeah,
So
that's how I'm interested.
so it sounds like you started off in the traditional grammar translation, like a lot of people who are attending
Right.
universities or seminaries. Actually, when I was my last episode, I talked with uh, Jenny and Rogelio from Triodos Trivium, and they
Mm-hmm.
had the same things: grammar translation in university. So what got you from that to more communicative, teaching? And did you ever
Sure.
have a class like that, or did you just sort of find your own way to start teaching that way?
Yeah, great question. So when I was doing that Greek course, the saving grace was that um, I had a recorder, like a little voice recorder. And back in the day, you could buy one of those at like, oh, what was the little Radio Shack is what it was called. I think Radio Shacks are gone now, right?
Oh yeah.
Um, and so I had this little voice recorder, and what I started doing was reading portions of the vocabulary sections in that grammar out loud and then listening to them back. So I would listen to myself back, right? And then throughout the grammar, there's also sentences. So I'd read those out loud and then listen to them back. I'd go on a walk or a run and be listening to that back all the time, trying to get the audio input, the verbal input, just like you would in a real language when somebody's talking to you. And that was the saving grace for me, was the ability to record and just listen to that back and try my best to simulate uh, a one-sided conversation, really. Um, and so time went by. I didn't really keep up with a lot of Greek. I took a year off between that master's degree and my PhD program. And when I went back to the PhD program, like Asbury's PhD program is super language heavy.
Mm.
So in your first year, you're going to be working with 6, maybe 7 languages, and you have to show proficiency or you're out, right? So in your first semester, like I was a New Testament student in a biblical studies PhD with a focus on New Testament, right? So for me in my first semester, by the end of my first semester, I had to uh, pass um, an advanced Greek course. So you have to do an advanced course in the language of your testament that you're focusing on. So for me, that was Greek. And then also by the end of that first semester, you have to have completed an intermediate course in the language of the testament that's not your focus. So for me, Hebrew. And then at the end of that first semester, you also have to pass your French competency exam. Second semester, you have to take Aramaic 1 and pass that. And you also have to, at the end of that semester, pass your German competency exam. And of course, you're operating in English or whatever someone's native language is at the time, but you have to show proficiency, of course, in English as well. So super language heavy that first year, and it continues on the second year where you start to move more into your testament of focus and working with that language. But so I knew going into that, oh man, I got a lot of language work ahead of me. And so I managed to get through um, that first semester. And at the end of it, I think it was at the end of that first semester, I just decided um, I'm going to go to Israel. I had heard about what Randall Booth was doing there, and I wanted to check that out because if they're speaking it, well, that's what was really working for me in the Greek class was the audio input, right? The verbal input. So if there's people speaking it, I want to go to where I can get a bunch of verbal input. And so I went to one of the seminars in Jerusalem for a month by myself, stayed there for a month and went through the courses and started to have a paradigm shift of sorts, realizing, I don't suck at languages. I'm actually pretty good at them. Um, it all has to do with the pedagogy, right? And so things started clicking for me. Um, was able to see guys like Ben Cantor and Jordash Kifiak and others uh, where they were at that time, and was just really encouraging Randy himself, Randall Booth, and really just encouraged by that and thinking that's where I want to get. I want to try to move in that direction. And so I came back after that, and there was nothing. Once again,
Mm.
I'm back in a situation, a scenario where it's just me, right? I had a community for 3 or 4 weeks, but now I have nothing, right? So that's where I launched. It used to be called Conversational Koine Institute, and I ran that for about a decade. And then life just got too busy, so I couldn't keep up with it. But what that allowed me to do was to create a pretty great online community where other people were practicing their speaking. So I started writing out lessons and developing my own curriculum. And that curriculum largely was designed in a way that it filled all the gaps, or it was trying to fill the gaps that I experienced in my um, grammar translation approach, as well as the gaps that were still remaining once I came back from Israel. I did a couple more of the booth seminars in Fresno, and that allowed me to still continue to refine my own curriculum where there were still gaps in my learning and where I thought, well, there might be some pedagogical needs that need to be met that I wasn't getting from that. And so that's you talked about the intermediate plateau and what helped me get over that. Certainly going and participating in those communities, but really for me, a lot of the growth happened in teaching and trying to teach. Because I think for a lot of anything in life, right? Once you have to teach something,
Yep.
That's where the real growth starts to happen. And so that's what allowed me to begin to level up, as it were.
Yeah, I know this is probably really bad linguistics, but I'll tell students or people I talk to, like the Hebrew lamad versus limed, the kal versus pl stem, and like one is learn,
Yeah.
one is teach, and that to teach is just to learn intensively.
That's right. Yeah.
Again, it's probably terrible linguistics and probably is the etymological fallacy or something to that extent, but it's anyway, it makes a point.
Yeah, well, no, I mean, I agree with the heart of that, right? The sentiment of that. Yeah, like learning or teaching is intensive learning. It's a great way to put it. Um, and we never stop. We never stop learning. So, or we shouldn't stop learning.
Yeah.
So keeping up with all that's been really important. And it was really a fun time in my life to be running that institute and um, meeting, being able to help train missionaries um, and business people and pastors and students who would go on to become professors and just meet people all over the planet that shared this love for the Greek language and same passion for it.
So, so let me throw a curveball at you. If you could
Yeah.
start over, like knowing what erase your Greek competency, but knowing about techniques and methods, if you had to start over from zero, what would you do differently today? How would you
Yeah.
start? How would you start from scratch?
If I had to start over as a Greek learner, like,
Yeah.
yeah, as a student, um, I think what I would do is strive to find a community that is interested in knowing the language and using the language and not just knowing about the language.
Mm.
Right. And I think back when I started that didn't exist so much. And that's only recently become a thing. So you mentioned it was Jenny and Rogelio. I don't
Mm.
know those folks, but I know they're doing some good work.
Yeah.
You see communities like that popping up. And then, of course, Booth's got his thing popping up, and Jordash got his thing popping up. And I had my thing going for a long time. And I have different community where I have different places where that pops up now, like that I get to teach it in a university setting. And I've been doing that for almost a decade now. But I would say number one priority would be to find yourself a community that you can plug into that is actively using the language. Yeah.
Yeah. I really, I very strongly agree with that. I think not only just for the chance to practice, but also just motivation. Like it's
Exactly.
easy to get discouraged when it's a lot of work or like, man, I just opened a text and I don't understand anything. Like makes you want to quit. But then knowing that there's people out there who are thinking about it and might be able to give you advice or help you and stuff, or at least are struggling alongside you. Like I think that's really motivating. It can help you keep
Yeah.
going.
And another thing, like um just realizing that if you're in a situation like a Bible college or seminary, university, where the approach is the grammar translation approach and you're struggling through that, realize that it's probably not you.
Yeah.
It's the pedagogy, right? So I had nobody to tell me that. Like I thought I was bad at languages. Turns out I'm not. Like I'm pretty good at languages. And once that clicked for me, everything changed. So, realizing that the pedagogy is super important and that we're all in some way wired to use languages and learn languages, and that we all are in a way wired to be good at it. And it just matters the community that we're in, who's teaching us, the approaches being used. And so you talk about motivation, that's what just made me think of that. I had nobody to motivate me and tell me no, Michael, like, I think you're pretty good at that, or pretty good at this. You may be struggling to stick with it.
Yeah.
It's really just the approach. It's really just the way the professor's going about it. Like, but you're not the problem here, right? Yeah. So I would have given anything to have that at the start of, the biblical, learning the biblical languages, or given anything for that.
Well, and as you're talking, just sort of thinking about the story you've told, you took a grammar translation class and in a small way using your voice recorder, you transformed it into a more communicative class. And so I'm assuming that would actually be a good approach too for students who are stuck in a grammar
Yeah.
translation method to think, okay, what can I do with my professor? Maybe I can talk to the professor, or if not, like, what can I do with the books and things that I'm required to use to transform
Yeah.
them into something more communicative? Or maybe there's another student that might be interested in working
Exactly.
together.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. I was just guest lecturing in a Greek class last semester for another professor, and uh, one of the talking points was exactly that. What are some tips you would give to students, right? And my first one was record yourself and listen to that back as much as you can. And the second thing, if there are others, get together in pairs or in small
Hmm.
groups, even if it's online, once a week, an hour a week, and just practice trying to talk to each other. There's been this sort of maxim that's been floating around the communicative circles. It's I think it's Martin Luther or Augustine taken out of context and applied to language learning, but this idea of when it comes to language learning, sin boldly, or language use, sin boldly. I think it was Randy Booth who was had who said that often. Like, in other words, just go for it. Like,
Yeah.
don't be afraid to mess up, because it takes thousands and thousands of errors and mess ups to really truly get to proficiency in a language. And so in my own Greek classes now, taught at seminary and university levels, one of the things that I do, I don't give quizzes and I don't give exams. And it
Right.
immediately takes the pressure off, right? Because that's antithetical to language learning, where you actually have to mess up to learn a language. So how am I going to count off when the point is to mess up so you can learn a language, right? And another thing that I do in terms of assignments is every week I have my students record themselves going through all the new vocabulary that they're supposed to learn, and uploading that. So that's, they
Hmm.
use their phone and they just upload the audio file, and I just listen to it, and that's how I'll grade it, right? And um, then along the way I have them do like screen recordings of them reading a passage, like, and I'll watch as they follow along with their cursor as they read. And so moving more into audio visual stuff for their assignments as well. And that helps bake that speaking and listening in, even if they don't have classmates that they're practicing with.
Yeah, that's great. I listened to you. I think you had a podcast episode of yours a couple of days or a week or two ago where you talked about that, like not giving quizzes and exams. And I think
Mm,
it's great because it takes that, like, we have that emotional, like, affective filter or
yeah,
whatever, and it takes the stress out. So it's like people can relax and just let their brains, like, soak in
yes.
language and acquire it naturally. So yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. So I love that, and the students love it. They're grateful that there are no quizzes and no exams. And people might, be listening and think, well, doesn't doesn't that like allow them to slack off? I've found the exact opposite to be true, that they take a greater interest in the language, and they get their work in on time. And I haven't had any issues with that, you know.
Well,
Um,
and at least with my understanding of how human language acquisition works, if you're giving a quiz and or an exam and grading it, you're not actually grading their proficiency in the language. You're grading their ability to know things about the language to
yes.
some extent. So, unless it's like, I think you mentioned in your podcast, like, unless it's a sit down and have a conversation with me for 10 minutes kind of exam, then, and that's different. That's more of a activity than a traditional quiz, right? So, I mean, unless it's that, you're not actually grading language learning anyway.
Right. In my Greek 2 and Greek 3 classes that I've taught, I have at the end, but not in Greek one. I have at the end of those had an exam, and it's the students have a choice. They can either sit down with me for 5 to 10 minutes, and we'll like have a story or something, and we'll just go through it, and I'll have them read it, and I'll ask them questions about it in Greek, and they got to respond in Greek. Or I have like a 4 or 5 page written exam, and they can take the written exam. It's all in Greek. There's no English involved. So, and believe it or not, I've had a few students opt for the Greek written exam and take it, just because they're more comfortable with that sort of thing. But um, it's fun. I think even with those exams, there's not really a lot of edge, and a lot of stress going into them because they're well prepared and they know what to largely expect.
Well, and I forget who I was reading or listening to talking about this, but like even in that case, you've turned your exam into an opportunity for communication, and it's all in Greek, so it's still, in a sense, it's still input,
Right.
um, even in the form of an exam or a quiz. So that's
Yeah.
it's keeping it in the
Yeah.
language.
Yeah. It's been, I'm fortunate that I've had the opportunity every place I've been able to teach to do that. I know a lot of my Greek professor friends, um, they don't have the ability to do that. They don't even have much say over what textbook
Hmm.
gets used, right? And it's super unfortunate. It's kind of one of these situations where a committee above the committee, who is really sort of hands off, gets to decide what the curriculum looks like, even down to the textbook and down to the pedagogy. And these professors are fighting an uphill battle, um, even down to pronunciation. What kind of pronunciation has to be used? And I think I would I would really have a lot of trouble being in a situation
Yes.
like that. I wouldn't. I don't think I would exist too long.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's frustrating to think, I have all these colleagues who could be doing such creative things, and uh, that in turn would raise the enrollment in Greek, which in turn would help the institution financially. But the institution's so institutionalized that they've been doing it this way for this
Yeah.
long, this pronunciation, this book, this curriculum, that they can't see past it. It's I feel for those folks. I feel for them. Yeah.
So, what are you doing? I think I can probably guess the answer to this, but what do you do now to keep improving? Uh,
Yeah. Oh, that's a wonderful question. I get asked that a lot. So I teach still. So that's one way. Again, teaching is learning, right?
yep.
And I'm always it's fun when I have students correct me or pick up on a place where I messed up. And I don't have these aspirations to be like a purist or a perfectionist. Again, because errors, that's all part of it. I've been speaking my native English for 42 years, and I've messed up a bunch during this conversation, right? But teaching is one way that I do that, and constantly when I have a Greek class coming up, revamping my curriculum.
Hmm.
So, and my curriculum is all in Greek, so constantly going back to that and editing it and revising it. So that's another thing. But I'm a full-time pastor, and so every week I have the luxury of preaching from a text, right? And that means I get to spend 20 to 25 to 30 hours a week, however long it takes to work with a text. I get to spend that amount of time dealing with Greek and Greek words and Greek concepts, or Hebrew words and Hebrew concepts. And I translate. So in our church services on Sunday, if you were to visit, we put the text up on the screen, and we have a little app we use, and the translation there is my translation, which is really fun. That and what I found is that in doing that over the long haul, it nurtures this kind of climate or atmosphere or community where people are suddenly intrigued. Well, your translation, Pastor, looks really different than the NIV or ESV that I'm reading. Why is that? Right. So they start to ask these questions. What's the Greek say here? Which is like the greatest thing when you have just, you know, regular old Johnny or Susie or Betty come up and they'll want to know about the Greek and what's going on there. And so translating is another way. Um, Also, you know, working on commentaries and right now and other projects. So I guess there's a multitude of ways that I'm able to keep up with Greek. I'm super intentional about it though. I could just use an NIV to preach from, but I'm very intentional about working with the Greek and offering a good translation. And yeah, so writing, teaching, translating, preaching, and revamping, editing curriculum is about 5 or 6 ways that I'm dealing with Greek every day. There's not really a day that goes by where I'm not into a Greek text or when I'm preaching through an Old Testament passage, Hebrew.
And so, like, that situation is not going to be attainable for a lot of people, the people have other jobs and things. But that, I think they can take a principle of that as like, okay, if you could, if you're going to read the Bible or, if you want to read Homer or whatever, try to read it in Greek, right? Try to write notes to yourself in Greek, or, do as much as you can of your life and your work in Greek as you can. That's essentially what you're saying, if I could summarize.
Yeah, I've just short of having a community surrounding me to immerse myself in it, I just find other ways to immerse myself in it, right? And it just takes being intentional. Like that's really what it boils down to, the sort of motivation theory and intentionality. And it's a part of my life. I love the languages and super intentional about staying embedded in them and getting them embedded in me. Yeah.
So let me hit you with one more. I think I probably have two more questions, but what are your favorite tools or resources for Greek at the moment? Give you like your top three.
Yeah. So I've been for the last 20 years a hardcore BibleWorks user. And I don't know if a lot of your listeners will know about BibleWorks, but this old Bible software, and it went out of business, I guess, a decade ago. I don't know how long it's been, but every computer I've had since I've had a computer, I've had BibleWorks on, except this one that I'm using right now to talk to you. It's the first computer I haven't installed BibleWorks on, and that's I've switched over to stepbible.org.
Okay.
So that's my number one go-to resource when I'm working with the languages these days or doing anything with the text of scripture or other ancient texts, right? So stepbible.org, it's free. It's wonderful, and hopefully I've been talking with Dave Instone Brewer, who's launched that project, and Mark Cannon, who used to work for BibleWorks, is now working with them. And there's been some discussion about possibilities of some things I can do to help them in the future to make that program a little better. But I'd highly recommend that to everyone. When I'm working with, because I'm doing commentary writing, like right now I'm preaching through the Gospel of Mark and working on a commentary on the Gospel of Mark. Essentially every episode or passage in Mark's gospel is going to have multiple links back to the Old Testament. And so I find myself working still with Hebrew a lot. And another resource that I often check out is also created by David Instone Brewer. It's called Two Letter Lookup. And so I'd highly recommend that to your listeners as well. It's really, you can use that for Greek and Hebrew. I think even Latin, maybe. Essentially, you can go in and start typing like the first two letters of any Greek or Hebrew root, and then boom, like it populates all the possible vocabulary and gives you the lexical information
Hmm.
for that. So
That does sound nice.
yeah, stepbible.org, two-letter lookup, I think it's .com. Um, and I guess the third thing I would say is just Glossa House resources. So I started Glossa House with Fred Long about Fred's a professor at Asbury Seminary about 11, 12 years ago. And we are constantly putting out new biblical language resources, um, print, audio, video, and we are on the cusp. And I guess this is maybe one of the first places this has been shared on your podcast. We're on the cusp of releasing our digital library, which all our print works will be available in digital form. So we're very excited about that, and that'll allow people in countries where shipping might be astronomical, or they don't have the space to store physical books. That'll allow a lot more access to people and those sorts of situations, missionaries, developing countries, developing nations, to have access to our works. And so, yeah, the Gloss House stuff, the Proof Text podcast that I run is also another way that I keep up with my language stuff. And I would highly recommend that, not just because I'm running that, but because it's very language oriented. We have, and it's all free. So we have like Greek vocabulary short episode every week. We have now a Hebrew vocabulary. We have an episode every week or every other week where Fred and I are working just verse by verse through Galatians, looking super close at the Greek. That's all free. Fred has a Sunday episode called Greek Matters, where he's looking at a Greek text up close and explaining what he sees going on. I have a Greek reading that I do every week. And so all of that is free and just a way to just a few minutes a day keep up with your language learning. Yeah. So those are maybe my top two, three or four, I guess.
I like that. I follow your podcast, and I've seen like the one on Greek roots and things, and they're like 3 to 5 minutes maybe for a lot of these episodes. And I like that because when I think about building habits for like for working in Greek or Hebrew or whatever, like I think you have like, okay, this is the bare minimum I want to do. Like I've got 3 minutes. I'll count this as my work for the day. And okay, maybe my goal is I want to read a chapter or read 15 minutes. Like, well, I can't do that. At least I've got 3. I can flip through podcast, or, I can listen to a podcast or flip through, I use Anki for flashcards, and like you actually record myself saying the word so that when I see the card, I hear the audio too. And
excellent.
So I think having quick resources is great. Just something you can do in a few spare minutes. So
yeah, absolutely. So those are the resources.
And so that brings me to my last question, which you kind of started to answer. So where can people find you, and what are you working on that you're most excited about at the moment?
Yeah, people can find me on all the typical social media platforms. I'm on Facebook. I'm more active in terms of like posting on there, although I don't post a lot these days. I've kind of become a little bit jaded by social media, and become more of like an observer than a full-on participant these days. But I still do post from time to time on Facebook. I'm on Twitter, and I have a YouTube. I have my own YouTube channel, but most of that stuff is just tagged from the podcast, the Proof Text podcast. Very active with the podcast. So if you do like at Glossa House for any of the platforms, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, they even started a TikTok now, and they're posting stuff on there, which is hilarious to me because I would never use TikTok on my own. So maybe I'm missing something there, but I have a personal Twitter. I haven't posted on there in years. I have a photography Twitter or photography Instagram called Aloha Outsider. I'm not, I got a lot of beautiful pictures I posted on there, but not active. Mostly active with the podcast and Glows House stuff. But you can find me all over the place, or just michaelhalcomb.com. Go there and
Yep.
you see all the links to my personal socials, or glowshouse.com and the Glows House socials, which I do a lot of engaging in those. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I'll put links to those various things in the in the episode description,
Yeah.
and so people can find you.
Yeah, so your other question, working on, I just mentioned, yeah, I'm working on a commentary on Mark. I have the first draft of a commentary on Revelation done, and it's sitting. I'm just letting it sort of simmer before I
Mhm.
return to it. It's been about a year and a half, I guess, maybe close to two. My commentary on First Corinthians just came out with Seabed, which is exciting. I'm glad to see see that see the light of day. Um, I have a Greek curriculum that I'm just slow editing, slow revamping and working on, and hope to roll that out. Um, I just a new book came out that I have an essay in titled Biblical Sexuality, and so I just finished working on that, and also editing a few things. So yeah, lots of stuff coming down the pipeline. Never not writing something, never not working on something, and the podcast takes a lot of my time. You
Yeah.
know, producing, recording the episode, then doing the editing, then the descriptions and the posting, and whew, it's a lot of work, man. So
Yes. Yes, it
that
is.
goes into a podcast, but um, yeah. So yeah, it's exciting stuff, and just met with someone yesterday, um, and I can't say much about this because I don't know exactly where it's going to go, but um in discussion about the development of a new app, and I got to play around with the app, and it's amazing where it's at right now, for Koine, that is quite like Duolingo. So I'm hoping that I'll have some role in this, and my dream would be that this would make its way out under the umbrella of Glossa House, but I don't know. We'll see. Um, but that's been super exciting to see that, and the thoughts of potentially having input and a part on that. I don't know where that's going to go, but
Hmm.
that's something else that's in the works. We'll see. Yeah.
Well, I really appreciate you taking the time to sit down and chat. And it sounds like you're into have a lot on your plate. And so yeah, thank you very much for taking the time.
Yeah, it's nice meeting you, Fletcher. I hope it's been helpful to a listener or two out there, and I'm grateful for the invite and the opportunity to share some of my own story and my own learning journey. I appreciate it. Thank you very much.
All right. Well, thank you.
All right, take care. Aloha.
Intro and outro music is Funky Thanksgiving by Admiral Bob, used with gratitude under Creative Commons 3.0 Attribution License. The track can be found at dig.ccmixer.org.
Interested in growing your ancient language skills but not sure where to start? Glossa House can help. From illustrated readers and short stories to lexicons and grammars, Glossa House offers a variety of resources for beginning, intermediate, and experienced ancient language learners. Head to glossahouse.com today. Glossa House, language resources for the global community.